Good afternoon and a warm welcome to everybody. I can see that quite a number of people have already started signing in. My name is Josh Ogada, and on behalf of the Africa-Leds Partnership and the Africa Mini-Grids Community of Practice, I'd like to wish you all a warm welcome to this third session in our series, in our virtual workshop series entitled Making the Case for Mini-Grids in Africa. Thank you to those of you who were able to attend our second session and are joining us again for today's. And for those who are joining us for the first time, just a quick reminder that we have got the recordings for the previous webinar up on our website. We will be giving you the details of those a little after that. But just to move swiftly on to the business of today, today's webinar, we have a time slot of 90 minutes, and it's our sincere hope that as many of you as possible will be able to stick with us through the entire 90 minutes or however long it takes us. We will have a Q&A session at the end. We've got a lineup of really exciting speakers coming up, and we hope that we will, as far as is possible in a webinar environment, be as interactive as possible. And that would entail those of you who have questions or comments being able to put those through to our presenters so that they could address them. We have, you will notice at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you've got a Q&A box where you can, we would encourage you to put in your questions, which our panelists will then either answer as they speak or keep to answer at the end during the time dedicated for the question and answer session. We also have a chat function where you can alert the panelists or everybody to particular issues, but we'd strongly recommend that in terms of your questions, you put them in the Q&A box. It's easier for us as the panelists to access them there, address them, and make sure that they're covered in the space of time that we have together. So for my part, on behalf of the Africa-Leds Partnership, I'd just like to welcome you again. And for those of you who are probably joining us and are not familiar with the work of the Leds Global Partnership or the Africa-Leds Partnership, I'll just do a very quick introduction to who we are and what we're doing before we zero in on the topic for today's webinar. And when I hand it over to one of my colleagues, Alexander Ochs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just a very quick introduction to the Africa-Leds Partnership. Our mission is to promote low carbon emissions, climate resilient development in support of poverty alleviation, job creation, and environmental management in Africa. The Africa-Leds Partnership is the regional platform of the Leds Global Partnership, which also has platforms in Asia and in Latin America. And broadly speaking, our objectives are the promotion of information exchange and coordination amongst LED programs and country institutions who undertake and support low emissions development strategies. What we try and do in the partnership is also to cultivate and support LEDs champions across the continent. And of course, we do this through the information exchange, through peer knowledge exchange, through capacity building, and providing a space where there can be development and exchange of ideas. And of course, in line with enhancing capacity, we do that in trying to provide space for growing that capacity in terms of LEDs design and implementation across the continent. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of the structure of the Africa-Leds Partnership, we are guided by the steering committee, which is headed by two co-chairs in the persons of Dr. Alan Serge Kouadio, from the Ministry of Environment in Cote d'Ivoire. And we have just we're very lucky to have Dr. George Wamukoya from Kenya, who heads up the Africa Group of Negotiators Expert Support Unit and is based in Kenya. And primarily provides a lot of expertise for us in the area of AFLP, which I'll be speaking about shortly. In terms of our secretariat, I am speaking to you from Cape Town in South Africa. An organization called South North holds the secretariat role for the Africa-led partnership. We have our email address there in case you need to get in touch with us, and we will be posting this up later on if anybody is interested in finding out a little bit more about the Africa-led partnership. And we can also direct you if you need to find out more information about the LEDS global partnership. Just a quick mention in terms of our structure. The work that we do is supported by an energy working group, a finance working group, as well as strong support from the LEDS Global Partnership Secretariat as well. We also have strong support from the National Renewable Energy Laboratories based in the United States. And of course, we are funded by the German government through GIZ. Next slide, please. So in terms of our focus areas, we focus on strengthening membership and membership engagement around the different themes across low emissions development strategies. We try to build regional partnerships and collaborations where countries and regions can work together under the different thematic areas to advance LEDs on the continent. In 2017, we set up our Africa Mini-Grids community of practice to bring together public sector, private sector practitioners, developers who are all working in the area of mini-grids to have a space where there can be the sharing of ideas and furthering the work that they're doing within their different countries and their different regions. And this particular webinar series is being hosted under the aegis of the Africa Mini-Grids Community of Practice. Just a quick mention that we also have our Agriculture, Forestry and Other Land Use Community of Practice, which was set up a year later in 2018 and has also been quite active. If you visit our Africa LEDS Partnership website or the LEDS Global Partnership website, you can find more information on our folio community of practice. We have quite a number of activities lined up for the year for both communities of practice. So we will keep you updated on those as the year goes along. And in terms of our focus areas, we also have two cross-cutting themes, which are financing for LEDs, as well as long-term strategies that we weave through the work that we are doing within our communities of practice. Next slide. And I think at that point, I am happy to hand over to Mr. Alexander Ochs, who will be moderating this session and leading on this particular webinar. Welcome, Alex, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. I hope you can all hear me well. I have to say, it's really a great pleasure to partner with you on this event and on the larger African Mini-Grids Community of Practice. Hello, everyone, also from my side. My name is Alexander Ochs. I'm the founder and director of SD Strategies and the chair of the Energy Working Group of the LEDS Global Partnership. I say a few words about those organizations in just a moment. We have a really excellent set of speakers today, calling in from Cape Town, South Africa, from Aberdeen in Scotland, from Vienna, from Vilnius, and I myself am calling in from Berlin. And I really hope that wherever you are in a safe environment during these really challenging times that we're all facing, and that you and yours are and remain healthy. So today's session is on advancing climate objectives and sustainable development through mini-grids and rural electrification. And what you see in front of you are our plans. We can make a check already after the first program point. Josh already welcomed us in the name of the Africa LEDS Partnership. Now it's my turn. I introduce to you briefly what the Energy Working Group is doing and show you a few slides that introduce the topic. So we're making sure we're all starting on the same level and taking the same entrance door to this conversation here today. Then we have three excellent speakers who I'm going to introduce to you one by one in some more detail when they speak. Ieva Indriunaite will be our keynote speaker today. She will speak about the co-benefits of mini-grids-based electrification. She will be followed by Franz Kottulinsky, who will speak about his mini-grid projects and how his company supports the productive use of electricity. And then on relatively short notice, and the first big thank you already to Victor Osu, who is working with the Nigerian government and who currently installs mini-grids in health centers across the country as a quick response to this terrible pandemic of COVID-19. That's our lineup, and we're determined to leave time for Q&A in the end for discussions. We've received questions already ahead of this session here today, so I'm hoping we can address as many of those as possible. And those that we can't answer during the session and live, we will make sure we answer to you in writing. So please bring in your comments, your questions, and we're going to do our best to answer them during the session or afterwards. So now my page is supposed to jump to the next slide. Here we go. A word about who we are. ST Strategies is a policy and communications consultancy based in Berlin, but with a global network of partners. We support governments and other stakeholders, and we really specialize on issues at the intersection of development, economic and social development, energy, and the environment. We have a number of work streams where we spend most of our time on currently. It is very much in this area, mainstreaming climate and sustainable development goals and policies. It's about advancing energy access, SDG 7, rural electrification, but also some city work now. How do you create smart cities that integrate different sectors of the economy, integrating transport and energy, and we have a quite successful project to empower women in the energy sector as well. Why do we do the session today? Because we've been asked to, and here's some highlights of our recent work in this very area. We have worked on a tool analysis, tools that allow you to integrate Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals with multilateral environmental agreements, such as the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC. We've worked with the Mexican government on co-benefits of climate actions, really trying to measure, to quantify the impact of individual climate commitments, many of which have been in the energy area. We've been working on community engagement as a very important component of creating a productive load and working with communities on mini-grids and standalone systems and other means of rural electrification, so that they benefit really to the best possible. And we have worked in several countries on helping to design their mini-grids policies, including in Sierra Leone. What's the Let's Energy Working Group? You heard from Josh, who is leading a regional platform, the Africa platform. The regional platforms are the center of gravity in the Let's Global Partnership, but there are several working groups that are advising the regional platforms, and you can join us as a sectoral group and help with our work, bring in your ideas, help us implement the work. We're really a worldwide demand-driven network. We now have 1,500 members with, of course, a different level of engagement. And we're open to all. We're open to everyone who's working in the field of energy, both on the decision-making side as well as experts. Currently, we're having 3 broader thematic areas where our priorities lie: long-term energy sector transformation pathways, sustainable access for energy access for all, and then cross-sectoral integration, where we're working quite actively with the other working groups of the Let's Global Partnership. We support the Let's Global Partnership as such and the regional platforms on energy, but we currently have 3 very active communities of practice which we're co-steering together with the regional platforms. The one today is organized together with the Africa platform on mini-grids, but we also have 2 other communities of practice, one in Asia, where we're dealing with, in a way, just the opposite, large-scale renewable grid integration. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, we're working on bioenergy issues. We provide technical assistance to countries and regions that bring forward their requests, working with the international funders to answer those requests. We do events such as the one today, where we're hoping to build capacities, where we're learning together and drive capacity. And we do so-called knowledge products, so we work on case studies, toolkits, and other go-to resources, all of which can be found on the Let's GP websites, as well as on the web pages of the regional platforms. Please join us if you're interested in this topic. You will find a link online on the website of the Let's Global Partnership, letsgp.org, and there you can then check those topics and those regions that you're most interested in. A few slides only to lead us into the discussion today. What you see here is taken from a report from GIZ, which we were getting involved with then as well on quantifying some of those many different arrows that you see here on in front of you. And I'm not going to say long with this, but just to explain what this shows is this, the small bullets, the small points on your visual. These are individual climate actions in different areas. And then the larger ones are the so-called development co-benefits, the SDGs that they relate to. The green ones are economic co-benefits, the blue ones are social co-benefits, and the orange ones are economic co-benefits. And you see this enormous link of correlations between individual actions and the benefits that they can advance. All of this, mind you, in addition here, seen from a climate perspective, in addition to supporting climate mitigation and adaptation. What is the role of mini-grids in today's world, and what can we envision for them in the future? There has been an important report by ASMAP and the World Bank last year that analyzed how many mini-grids exist. So these are 2019 numbers, when we had already about 19,000 mini-grids worldwide, serving close to 50 million people. About $28 billion have been invested. Now, these mini-grids of the past were mostly diesel and hydro mini-grids. About 50% of these mini-grids have been in Asia. And there's quite an interesting trend, because what the study also looked into was which mini-grids were planned in 2019 for this year, this and the following years. And it came to the result that by then 7,500 new mini-grids were being planned or under construction that would serve an additional 27 million people worldwide. Another $12 billion of new investment. And now it comes most interesting. Those mini-grids, the vast majority of those mini-grids were not diesel and hydro anymore, but solar hybrids. And also the regional focus of investments has switched from South Asia to Africa. Now, today, more than 50% of all investments are in fact in Africa, which is the focus of our discussion today. Now, to remain in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly SDG 7, energy access, and the goal of providing sustainable energy for all, here is what the World Bank thinks needs to be the role of mini-grids in 2030. By then, the World Bank assesses not the potential of mini-grids, but really the need for mini-grids to play its role in the largest set of solutions for energy access at more than 200,000 mini-grids worldwide, serving about 500 million people, about 500 million people. This would mean another $220 billion of new investment. Most of those mini-grids will be solar hybrid. And to give you a first exciting sort of a snapshot of the development impacts that it can have, the World Bank estimates the climate benefits at about 1.5 billion tons of CO2 that would be avoided if these mini grids were really implemented and are operational in 10 years from now. Now, this slide here, many of you are familiar with, and I don't want to stick with it too long, but what it shows you basically is that energy access, of course, is not always the same. You can have a candle or a petroleum lit lamp that provides lighting services, but of course, energy services have different levels of quality and overall supply. From just individual light bulbs in tier 1, this is also based on World Bank, a very common methodology, to really 24-hour services of many different and partly energy intense energy appliances. And the exciting thing about mini grids is that it can deliver electricity up to tier 5, so to really sort of the highest level of electricity quality. This is a first view, and we're going to hear a lot more about this. And I think she picks individual ones and spends more time on individual impacts of some of these co-benefits. But this is a first approach of what a mini grid does beyond just delivering electricity, which in itself is a high goal and arguably increases life quality enormously. But through electricity, you can also improve human health. We hear Victor and how it's being used in Nigeria in a moment. It can create jobs. It can create economic opportunities. It can reduce local pollutants and not just greenhouse gases. It can increase the energy security, it can provide energy access and then increase the energy security of whole countries, because if they are green mini grids that are based on domestic renewables, then you are not facing the risk of energy imports any longer. And of course you have educational benefits also coming from it, which are quite enormous. This is by no means all the benefits it creates. It's just an example of some of them. I think gender quality would be an important one to add here as well. All right, so this was my last slide. And so now it's a pleasure for me to introduce one of my colleagues as a keynote speaker today, Ieva Indriunaite. She's an associated consultant and has worked with us for the last 2 years on diverse projects at the intersection of energy, climate, and development. She focuses particularly on policy design, on innovative business models, and on effective financing strategies. And Ieva will now speak about the co-benefits of mini grids and dig a lot deeper into this. So Ieva, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I am just trying to see if I can get my video to work, and I'm not sure that it is working. Ah, there it is. Okay.
We can see you. Great.
Yeah, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my camera is experiencing some issues, but I'll do my best to remain in sight. Thanks, Alex, for the introduction. So Alex has already spoken about the multiple co-benefits that mini grids or mini grid-based rural electrification can deliver. What I thought I would speak about with you today was a little bit more in depth, looking at a few of these co-benefits, so a few of the SDGs specifically, and looking at what is required essentially to ensure that they materialize. So when we talk about co-benefits, I think it's clear that, or it's clear to me at least, that some of them may require a little less attention, or let's say, more of a strategic decision, let's say to choose, renewable energy resources over more traditional ones. And that can already link to climate co-benefits, for example. We can see that by, by the extension of electrification, you can have certain educational co-benefits and similar. But I think what I wanted to talk about today is that often we can really talk about just going one step beyond this at the policy level. So I'm mostly talking about the sort of policy perspective, but I'll very much want to highlight the idea that there should be a very strong partnership between the policy actors and project developers. And that by going one step further into a more holistic or smart policy design, program design, you can really arrive at much more than, which of course is very great in itself, rural electrification. Sometimes that comes really sort of, in a form of a strategic choice at the policy level. In some cases, it requires really more specific measures to be put in place. And I think what, in my head, at the very high level, what unifies the approaches that are required in regardless of which co-benefit we're talking about, is that we need to start sort of breaking silos, whether it's policy silos or operational silos, in which both policy actors and private actors operate. So we should start to think about how to design programs and policies that are cutting across, let's say, policy silos. We should think about applying measures and approaches across multiple levels. So as I said, starting at the policy or strategy level, program level, and project level. And finally, really thinking at how we can tap into multi-stakeholder partnerships. And here I will mention, I think, a number of things where I'm trying myself, sort of raising the question of, what could be done by private developers, for example, where they would require support from the policy makers. But also, of course, when we talk about multi-stakeholder partnerships, we should talk about a much broader array of actors, including development partners, including NGOs and a number of others. So today, I would like to highlight 3 co-benefits, and I will really stay at a relatively high level because, of course, each of them would deserve a session or several sessions in themselves, and just highlight some of the actions or some of the specific case studies where I think specific action was taken at a policy program project levels to arrive at multiple co-benefits through the mini-grid-based electrification. So starting with health. I kind of structured this into 2 parts. I wanted to highlight in this particular section really specific case studies of 3 different countries. So here I wanted to highlight a project from Sierra Leone. This is a country that we have worked with quite extensively with the SE strategies. And it's the Rural Renewable Energy Project, the RAP, which is implemented by the Ministry of Energy in partnership with UNOPS and the UK Department for International Development. And here, what I wanted to highlight is that the project is a multi-year and a very large-scale project. It has several work packages, but in the first one, there was a strategic decision, let's say, taken to prioritize health clinics and community health centers in the implementation of first standalone systems, which were then extended to mini-grids. So it was essentially a phased approach, which can, let's say, be beneficial perhaps from several perspectives, let alone resources, whether it's human resources or financial resources. And what is also quite interesting, I think, is that in this case, there was a formal interministerial cooperation agreement formed, so a very strong multi-stakeholder partnership formed between Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Health and Sanitation, and Ministry of Local Development. So while the initiative was driven through the Ministry of Energy, there was a strong partnership at the design and an oversight levels to ensure that this program, cuts across these sectoral boundaries and really draws on expertise from all of these sectors. So here I wanted to highlight this example as a, let's say, strategic prioritization or sort of thinking ahead kind of example. The second case study, which will be elaborated on by the following speaker, Dr. Victor Osu from Nigeria, is, let's say, is meant to highlight how mini-grids can be a go-to solution for rapid response to health crises. And I will leave here for Victor to speak more about how they designed it, why they chose mini-grids. But in particularly, we have asked Victor to also address such questions as sustainability post-crisis and whether they have thought about that and how that is addressed in the current project design. So I will not say much more about this in this case. And finally, in this health and community well-being section, I thought I would highlight a project that is not a mini-grid project. It's a renewable energy independent power producer procurement program, which has a lot of Ps from South Africa. And the reason why I wanted to highlight this project is that here I thought a very interesting approach was applied in the procurement processes to empower communities as well as empower socioeconomic development. So as you can see on the slides, 30% of the evaluation was based on socioeconomic development, including job creation and rural development. And this, of course, relates to SDG 8, the economic development, which I'll talk about in more detail. But also community ownership. So 2.5% was a requirement for community ownership. And here, I think I wanted to, in my presentation, to highlight a lot or sort of raise the question of where the leverage lies or where the mandate lies between the public actors and the private actors. And what can public sector actors do in situations, for example, in mini-grid markets, which are more private sector driven? So where does the line of responsibility and mandate, let's say, of rural electrification agencies, to how far does it extend? And procurement requirements, including for mini-grids, can be one of the measures that can be used to introduce this, more innovative or sort of criteria that cuts across sectors to develop multiple co-benefits. Of course, there are caveats to that. And you have to think of the, how this would work in your market, what the market situation is, what the developers are like. Are they able to, local developers, deliver on these requirements, for example? So there are a number of elements that you of course, as a policymaker should think about, but I thought that this is one of the interesting examples to highlight in this case. Moving on, I wanted to raise the example of gender equity and the empowerment of women. And here again, of course, and I should probably say that I'm covering these co-benefits individually, but of course, in many cases, and this is in particular in the case of gender, addressing gender in mini-grid projects should not exclude or preclude, addressing other co-benefits. So they are, of course, and in many cases should be interconnected. But I am sort of trying to distill some of the examples or practices that that can help deliver these particular co-benefits individually. So in the case of gender, gender mainstreaming is probably not a new approach to anyone. It has been a practice in many donor programs, and increasingly is a requirement as well for donor funding. There are specific programs that are addressing it. Talking about gender mainstreaming mini-grids, what I wanted to highlight is the importance of a holistic approach across multiple levels of action. So starting with the policy and strategy level, and I'll go straight into quick examples. Here we can talk about action at the regional level, and I wanted to highlight a brilliant example coming from the ECOWAS region, where they adopted a policy for gender mainstreaming and energy access, which was followed by a directive which mandates all of its members to mainstream gender in their national policies and in the work of their institutions, ministries, and agencies. And this gives a direct mandate for countries such as Nigeria, which has taken this on full speed, and I'll mention a few examples from there too. Here, I just thought that I would jump between the regions and mention that, for example, at the national action level, the way that you address it would be very context specific, of course, and every country would mainstream it in its policies and practices differently. Here you can see that the country had both a national policy on gender and development, which became the Gender and Equality Act. But last year they adopted a gender policy for the energy sector. So here, of course, at this level, we are not talking directly about mini-grids, but it's important to think about this level because that's where the mandate for subsequently mainstreaming it in the institutional program level, which I'll talk about in a second, as well as the project level comes from. So at the institutional and program level, this is really talking about how to mainstream gender in institutional systems and processes. And again, this is of course a very broad topic. We can speak about gender mainstreaming in HR policies, or designing specific skills training programs internship programs for girls and women, encouraging them to come, to study STEM professions, for example, or to perform internships in energy sector institutions. We can talk about gender responsive budgeting, but coming really more to the mini-grid level, to the mini-grid project level or program level. Applying a gender checklist, for example, for program design at the institutional level, which has been recently developed in Nigeria, is an approach that would allow you to apply a uniform approach towards addressing gender in your rural electrification programs. If, for example, this gender checklist was designed for a rural electrification agency, so it would allow you a uniform approach. It would make sure that all your programs and strategies, programs and projects are addressing this. It would allow you to collect information from different projects and feed it back into, let's say, improving this checklist, right? So what I'm talking here about is the fact that we talk about gender often, or many different actors are addressing these questions at a rather ad hoc, in rather ad hoc approaches, and there are a lot of them. But really, we should talk about a more holistic approach at the institutional program, and all these different levels. And finally, coming to the project level, here a few specific aspects that are important in terms of mainstreaming gender at mini-grid project level. First of all, we come to speak about situational assessments, which is a rigorous gender and social analysis that should be conducted before the design of large-scale mini-grid programs, for example, to understand the baseline and the underlying barriers in order to be able to address them through your program. So this is really a key element. What I also want to highlight is that it's possible to address gender and equity aspects throughout the project cycle, and there are multiple entry points for that. I think one of the interesting ones that I perhaps wanted to raise was the ownership and business models of mini-grids. So here we can, of course, speak about, first of all, community ownership, which I mentioned, for example, in the South African example. But I think for me, what's also important is the sort of the balance between, whether it's a more private sector driven mini-grid sector, mini-grid markets, let's say, that we're looking at, or sort of what role the utilities play in at the project level, for example. And because for me, I think starting to think about how much leverage they have in terms of addressing gender aspects throughout the project cycle can be related to some of these questions. However, what I wanted to mention, that even in the case where, for example, it's the market is driven by private actors, we can see how rural electrification agency can play a strong role in setting the standards, for example, in terms of requirements. And one of the examples again comes from Nigeria, where they have developed guidelines for mini-grid developers, which are still relatively new, but they will be applied to all mini-grid developers who are operating through concessions of the REA. And what's interesting is that it's still an initial stage, and Victor also can speak much more extensively about that. But it's interesting to see that the REA is planning to provide support for mini-grid developers from what I understand, in making sure that they understand and they have the means and the understanding of how to apply this in their projects. So what I'm interested in, and what I wanted to sort of discuss throughout these examples that I'm mentioning, are sort of this balance and this partnership of where does, let's say, the line of responsibility ends and the other one begins, and how to make sure that we form strong partnerships and that we utilize the skills and the skills and the means that are best placed at different with different actors, that rest with different actors best. Here is the case study that I think I will skip in the interest of time, and jump to the final final example, which is the economic development co-benefit. So in this case, of course, we can talk about a number of different we can talk about co-benefits through a number of different angles. One of them, for example, could be local content requirements, including local job requirements in let's say mini-grid projects. But I wanted to specifically focus on productive use of electricity. And this is a quote that I quite like from one of the recent reports by the World Bank and the AFD, which says demand and supply are interlinked, but demand matters more than perceived. I think in the recent years, both between development cooperation actors as well as by governments in the region, it has been really acknowledged quite considerably that productive use matters a lot to the sustainability of mini-grids, as well as to ensuring the economic development of the communities. So when we talk about productive use, maybe I'll just mention the definition that it's agricultural, commercial, and industrial activities involving electricity services as a direct input to the production of goods and provision of services. And why are we talking about this, or what kind of support is required? So the reason why we're talking about productive use and the actions that need to be taken, let's say additional actions to support productive use, is that it's been quite widely proven by a number of studies that simply by providing electricity access, that is not enough in most cases to spur economic activity, to spur productive uses. What is required are a number of elements. I have summed them up in this visual, which may be a little bit overwhelming, but the three key ones are knowledge development and capacity building. And that can include all business development services, as well as simply community engagement. In terms of knowledge development about the use of electricity for productive uses. Access to finance, so both access and affordability dimensions, value chain strengthening and access to markets. And also what I wanted to include are the design of appropriate technical solutions. And here again, we come to understand how important it is to design the mini-grid project appropriately, to size it appropriately, to be able to support the productive uses. Finally, one more element that I would mention, but that is maybe not talked about so much, is the design of specific productive use supportive tariffs. Although in some cases, so let's say designing differentiated tariffs for different kinds of users in the community that is connected. And here you can talk about either using a higher tariff for productive users to subsidize the tariff for individual users, as well as the other way around to lower the tariff for productive users to encourage their consumption, which is an interesting discussion in itself. So we know the gap and we know what is required, and here we start looking at, is this support provided? And as I mentioned, productive use has been increasingly acknowledged as an important element. There are a number of programs, especially linked to agriculture, that are trying to mainstream these two sectors. So rural electrification and agriculture. We see, but so what I wanted to highlight is that these initiatives are still quite sporadic. And here again, in line with my whole presentation, I wanted to suggest that perhaps there is a need for a more holistic approach at the policy level. But before I jump to that, I wanted to showcase that because we have had a certain gap or a vacuum of action by the public actors, policy actors, there are a number of developers that are supporting productive use activities. I would classify it into sort of different types of support. And I'm very glad that we have Franz today, who will talk about how his company is involved in fostering productive use in their projects. And it's really quite fascinating, the number of different approaches that they're using. But there is, let's say, a traditional approach, which would provide support along those pillars that I discussed. So it would be targeted business development services, could be grants to microfinance, could be procurement of equipment, as well as more innovative approaches where we can see that productive use support becomes part of a business model. Perhaps you have heard about a keymaker model or an anchor model. So in a keymaker model, you would have developer-owned and operated productive use business. You could have a fee-for-service approach where the developer is investing in productive use equipment and then is leasing it out to the users. or a productive use zone model, where it's essentially sort of designing a hub for productive use activities in the mini-grid project area. So there's a lot happening, and actually I don't have time to present my research that I conducted last year, but surveys show that most of the developers are trying to get engaged in this area, at least by one way or by combining the different approaches depending on the situation. So is there still a need for the public sector to get involved? And I would argue that that there is. So the benefits, of course, that we see with the private sector engagement are that they are applying different innovative models, that they are working really with the local communities, sometimes, you know, trying to really understand the local context, and that's really great. At the same time, what we see here is that, of course, for some developers it might come more naturally, for others it might come a bit less naturally, because of course by supporting productive use, we're stepping beyond the boundaries of, you know, let's say just electrification. So there are varying degrees of supports that are provided, and often not all pillars are addressed equally. Also, it's a project-by-project approach most often. So my argument here is that by applying a more holistic approach, or by designing programs that would have these requirements and the support designed and built into them, you know, perhaps we could have some economies of scale, perhaps we could learn between these projects, and we would be able to apply a more unified approach. So this brings me to the idea that there is a role for policymakers to look at this. It could be, of course, ad hoc support, which would be targeted, inevitably it would have to be targeted at all of these gaps that were identified across those four or several pillars to be able to be effective. And here you can see, it's I think one of the last slides. I know that I'm running out of time. So the ad hoc needs the ad hoc support would be provided to, let's say, you know, existing projects on a project-by-project level basis. It's and often perhaps applied ex post. So after the project is already in place, you know, you see how the productive use is taken off, and then if you see that there is a challenge, you know, you can apply additional measures. I think it's good, it's welcome, but often, you know, it perhaps particularly does not take into account the fact that it's important to size and design the mini grid from the onset to be able to take all of these factors into account. It also, of course, you know, stays at the project level. So my argument here is that we should really rather be looking at a more integrated approach and looking at how we can bring these different sectors together. So be it, let's say, rural development, being agricultural development, and work and encouraging these actors to work together and break these silos, whether it's led through the energy side or whether it's led through the, let's say, agricultural side. How these relationships are worked out, of course, depends really on the situation on the ground, but it's something that that is interesting to work towards. And interestingly, we have been working with Nigeria and Victor Osu in particular since last year. And Nigeria is actually currently trying to hit both two different approaches in supporting productive use in their mini grids and in rural electrification, specifically also in mini grids. So one is to look at the existing mini grid concession areas and see how those project areas are performing in terms of productive use, working with developers to define what are the needs and how the REA could support them in supporting the productive users. And the other one is really working at a much more strategic level, looking at the agricultural needs in selected regions, which were suggested by, I believe, the Ministry of Agriculture. So there's a strong collaboration, interinstitutional collaboration there, and really trying to define what are the needs of these two sectors and how they can be brought together at a much sort of, you know, starting with a strategic level and from the onset, having this integration from the onset. Oh, and that is a funny way of getting to the slide. This was just key takeaways from my presentation. So again, I wanted to highlight that even though when we talk about different co-benefits, we have very different approaches that would be required to make them happen, so to say. There are several aspects that definitely cut across. So one of them is the need to break these silos between different policy areas. And as I said, I've highlighted some examples where perhaps it was driven by still the energy sector actors, but there was a strong engagement with actors from other fields of work. So bringing this expertise and the needs together. Whether it's formal or more informal, and how these operations are devised really has to be tailored to the national, to the local sort of, the environment that they're operating in. I wanted to highlight that engagement is possible and useful at all levels, but really trying to hit, everything from more strategic level to the project level can provide a more holistic approach. And that planning it ex ante is perhaps a stronger approach than ex post, or a more holistic one. And finally, consider where the mandate's knowledge and means lie. And here again, we can talk about, when we talk about mini grids, of course, we have markets that are very different and that use various business and ownership models, and that defines also, I think, the roles and responsibilities of different actors. So really understanding where the strengths lie and how to bring these actors together is particularly important, and that's what should be done to arrive at these smart policies. And maybe I will leave it there, but I can always answer some questions in the Q&A.
Thanks, Ieva. This has been great. Wonderful, as always, to hear from you and to hear your insights. And I've seen already a number of questions for you that we'll turn back to with you towards the end of the session. So our next speaker is Franz Kottulinsky. Franz first worked as a legal counsel for various industrial companies. He then moved on to New York to work for the UN Fund for International Partnerships. And during that time, he really discovered the enormous potential that lies in public-private partnerships, arguably a very important vehicle in the mini-grids sphere as well. He then went on to advise the Austrian Development Agency on such matters, and in 2006 co-founded the Rift Valley Corporation to put some of his insights really into practice and actively implement public-private partnerships in a range of different issue areas, including the health and agricultural sectors. In 2008, he founded Rift Valley Energy, and since then he has worked mostly in the power sector. He works in several countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and you hear from him now on how his company has been pushing particularly productive use of electricity. So, Franz, take us on from here, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sharing my presentation now. Hope that works. Can everybody see this?
Looks great.
Okay. So first of all, good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to present Rift Valley Energy and our programs. Maybe we jump straight into the presentation. Who we are. Rift Valley Energy is a renewable energy infrastructure development company. We are purely private sector, and we are designed to own, operate, and develop, own, and operate relevant projects, mainly in the southern highlands of Tanzania. This has a historical context, as our parent company, Rift Valley Holdings, which is the major owner of Rift Valley Energy, had a tea business in Tanzania, and they had problems with the electricity supply. So the group decided to go into energy generation, because there was a small river nearby, and that was actually the birth minute of Rift Valley Energy. So over the past decade, we have established 2 hydro sites, which are with a capacity of a total of 5 megawatt. And as we were actually working with the European on this project, they actually asked us to go also in rural distribution, which in the beginning didn't make sense to us as it's a regulated business. The tariffs are quite low actually for the rural tariffs. But still, as the generation side was very positive and feed-in tariffs interesting, we could afford to go also into rural electrification. And we since have built, together with the European Union, a total of 400 kilometers of distribution assets in this specific area. We are serving with those two projects about 70,000 people in about 40 widespread villages in the Mufindi and Jombe districts. The area we're speaking about is the southern highlands of Tanzania. It's funnily, it looks a little bit like Austria. There's a lot of forest activity. It's very fertile. It's a wealthy area of Tanzania. There's a lot of wood processing, tea planting, so it's economically, it's a very interesting area to be as an electricity provider. So currently in this network we have about 4,900 connections, and we want to take that to 12,000 by 2024. Our pipeline is another 3 small hydropower projects with a total capacity of 8.5 megawatts. These are different locations also in the southern highlands of Tanzania, and we are currently finalizing our first wind project. It's a small wind park, 2.4 megawatt, which feeds into our own grid. I will explain it in a few minutes, how that works. And we are developing another mini grid in the near Tikuyu, which is in the Mbeya region. That's also southern Tanzania. This area alone, there are 50,000 people to supply. There's a local tea industry to be supplied. And in total, all Rift Valley energy projects, we plan to connect about 17,000 households in these 3 project areas. It's interesting probably for the audience is that we have every generation project has its own generation vehicle and a company selling electricity to our own distribution company. As the tariffs we offer are very low, we are regulated. We support through the generation business, the rural distribution business, until we get to cost reflective tariffs, which is a lengthy process to be negotiated mainly with the regulator. We sell the electricity under our own brand, Mwenga Power, in all that different areas. The partners we worked with, or we are working with, it's basically 3 baskets. It's development finance institution. I mentioned the European Union before. That was the ACP energy facility. We did 2 projects with the ACP energy facility. AGDEFCO is one of our partners for 2 other projects. We obviously work with the Rural Energy Agency of Tanzania. We have participated in 2 RBF results-based financing programs for 2 projects. Our commercial partners, Trade and Development Bank, the CRDB, which is our local bank in Tanzania, and we recently closed a senior debt facility with REP. This is the Renewable Energy Performance Platform. People in South Africa might know that, or internationally they are based, I think, in Johannesburg and London. So we working with them. Then we have different NGOs we work with. One is Energy for Impact in collaboration with Cross Boundary. We work with them on a trial PUE financing program. And then we have a collaboration with a small Funnily, Austrian origined NGO called the Rural Development Organization. They do vocational training services and water projects in our project region. So our flagship project is the Mwenga Hydro and Rural Electrification project, which we developed in 3 phases. The first phase you can see in the red circle. That was basically the construction of the 4 megawatt power station, connecting it to the grid, which is at the left side of the map, this little flash you can see in blue. A grid connected project along the transmission line. There were 15 villages which we agreed to connect and supply with electricity. We then found out that there was a huge demand from other villages in the project area. We then expanded in phase 2 the rural network to another 18 villages. Small sub-villages we also connected, so we are currently here on a total of 34 villages which we provide with hydropower. Now, in the dry season, when hydro capacity drops, sometimes very dramatically, we found out that our rural grid absorbs so much electricity that we decided to put some additional capacity in, which is the wind project, which I mentioned before, that we are currently finalizing. So this is a hybrid hydro wind mini grid. It's pretty unique in the region. From the capacity that is produced at the moment from the Mwenga hydropower station, 85% goes into TANESCO, 10% in the rural network. As I said before, when the hydro capacity drops, we have difficulties supplying the whole rural network. Hence, we are constructing the wind farm. Interestingly, when hydro capacity is low, wind blows in this region. So that's a very good balancing factor. In this project, we have currently 4,000 households connected. We supply 2 tea factories, big tea factories in the region as backup facility. They are normally TANESCO customers. We agreed to supply them when TANESCO is down, when they can't deliver electricity. In the old days, they had to use big diesel aggregators to produce this electricity. Now they can draw our power. This actually counts for the whole mini grid region. When TANESCO is down, we can make an isolated grid and can supply our customers with electricity. Further, we supply in the network area 44 schools, primary, secondary schools, colleges, 34 village offices, ward offices. So there's a big impact on the community life as well. For some reason, I didn't mention the hospitals here, but it will come on the next slide. Here, a little bit of technical information. Most of it I've addressed before. Probably what's interesting is the rural tariff structure. We are able to offer the lifeline tariff up to 50 kilowatt hour per month for 3 US cents. And this actually might be interesting for POE. It was addressed before. You need cheap tariffs to promote productive use of electricity. We have our industrial tariff with 10 US cents, so that's really affordable for the people to invest in productive use appliances and use this electricity. So how our projects are designed, not only the Mwenga Hydro, but also the other projects, obviously provide 24/7 grid quality power, as it's mainly hydro or wind power, which is a big boost for regional industrialization. we follow the ABC approach. This is A stands for an anchor customer, which in our case is TANESCO, the local business community, tea factories, wood processing industry, carpentries, and then the C sector, which are the rural end customer. Our projects, they are mainly decentralized, so at the far end of the national grid, distributed generation, they are grid connected, so we feed into the grid. In case we have to do maintenance on our projects, we can draw from the grid. So the supply for the customers is given. And what is good for the national grid is that our capacity stabilizes the grid at the far end. That minimizes also losses for TANESCO. I mentioned that before, attractive tariffs for our rural customers. They are regulated by Evora, the local regulator, and obviously we're trying to make them cost reflective, so the generation side of our business must not support for a long time the growing rural electrification market. We use for our rural customers a cell phone-based prepaid electricity vending system. This is state of the art in mini-grids. We support our rural customers with a small trial productive use of electricity financing facility. I will come to that later. Also, our project is UNFCCC certified. We have, since 2013, we have produced about 100,000 carbon emission reductions, CERs. A few of them still need to be verified. So how does, and this was mentioned in the other presentations as well, how does a mini-grid or our mini-grid impact the community? Yeah, I think the key sustainable development goal which is addressed is definitely 7, to provide affordable and clean electricity to the community. In our project, we have quite a dense population there, 70,000 people. We supply 3 hospitals, 21 health stations with permanent power, 44 schools in our network area, obviously the 2 tea factories, 1 dairy farm got recently connected, sawmilling parks. I have to explain a little bit. In our area, which is a forest area, a pine forest area, there are little smallholder pockets, people growing pine there. And in the old days, they went with diesel-powered sawmills into this area, which is obviously dangerous and polluting and expensive. We are changing that into electric-powered motors, basically. All this they call ding-dongs, which is a funny expression, but that's what they called. These are table sawmills, basically. Then we use, in our network area, we have dozens of PoE shops or little workshops where people use PoE appliances. I will come to that a little bit later, which appliances these are. So other 3 SDGs addressed through mini-grid.
Franz, I'm sorry, I have to jump in here, but I can only give you 3 more minutes. I'm sorry.
Oh my God, okay. Obviously, village, clean water, I mentioned that before. Here, milling machines are the main off-taker of productive use electricity. 48% of our appliances in the network are milling machines, actually. Then welding machines, all kinds of different appliances. They are actually high users of electricity. If you see the market, the wood processing market, sawmills, carpentry machine, milling machines is mainly for maize, but also wood pellet machines. So they are high users of electricity. We can supply them as we have grid quality power. Here also our PV appliances, how much electricity they use. The yellow bar you can see, that's milling machines. We run a financing program for productive use appliances. We basically lend little amounts of money. It's a microfinance program to eligible customers. They pay 20% cash deposit. They get into a loan agreement, 12 to 18 months, 2.5% interest per month, and the appliance changes ownership after full repayment of the loan. We currently have a small trial program, and interesting, so we have spent 30K of appliance financing for productive use and a little bit for household appliances. What's interesting is that only 3% of these appliances in our whole network area were bought through our program. So people in our project area have means of financing their appliances, either through families, through SACCOs or other financing programs. That's an interesting point. So if you provide electricity, people see they can use it for productive use. They try to find a way to finance this. My last slide, we have in our network area a small NGO called the Rural Development Organization. They have a vocational training center in our area where they educate students on all on very different job opportunities. We are working together with them to find a way how we can make productive use a specific course in their training center, and we are currently looking for funding. What does it mean? We try to educate young people how they use electricity or can use electricity in a productive way, set up a local business and earn a living. These are welding businesses, electric sawmills, maize milling, carpentry businesses, or electric cooking devices to be used in the hospitality industry. We haven't got funding for the program yet, but we are working on it. It's a very exciting program, and yeah, we hope we can pull it off in the near future. Here, who's interested, you can see a link. We've done a PR film who explains our business model, our project area, and here a few photos of what's happening in our network. Thank you.
Excellent, Franz. Just one warning, and then you rushed us through that. Yeah. And we're still absolutely comprehensive, and this was great. Thank you for this this sort of a private sector perspective and showcasing the work that you're doing. Just as a short note of disclosure, as the Let's GP, we are not promoting individual businesses or specific business models, but we are creating a platform where some of the private sector activities are being showcased, and as such we have had many speakers before from other companies applying other business models as well. So thank you very much, Franz. I think we'll come back to you in the Q&A. Our final speaker is Dr. Victor Osu. He's a senior advisor of the Rural Electrification Fund in the Rural Electrification Agency of Nigeria. And as such, he oversees the development of off-grid electricity infrastructure deployment to underserved and unserved rural communities in Nigeria. His role requires him to encourage investments in rural electrification through creating really the required policy enabling an environment. There are two really exciting off-grid infrastructure projects in Nigeria right now. One he's going to tell us about, which is the public healthcare centers that are being supplied with mini grids as we speak, and at high pace. And the second one is energizing the agricultural sector. He's also supporting the Ministry of Environment and their climate activities in the energy sector. He has a master and a PhD from the University of Aberdeen in the UK, and I believe that's from where he's calling in. That's where he often is. If he doesn't, he's not in Nigeria. So Victor, it's a pleasure to have you. I know you haven't been able to prepare slides, but I hope we'll see you. There I see you on camera, wonderful. Welcome to the show, and take it off from here.
Right, thank you, Alex. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to say thank you to the African Led for giving me this opportunity to speak. So apologies that I don't have a slide too, but I'm just going to talk through the very important thing that Nigeria has done in response to the COVID-19, and that is deploying 4 mini-grids within 14 days as an emergency response to the health sector, to the health centers that houses the isolation sites, and also the NCDC, that's the Nigeria Control Disease Center in Nigeria. So I'm going to talk through it using 4 key elements or components right now. First is the co-benefit of using mini-grid to drive the health sector from the government perspective and in response to the COVID-19. Second one is going to be the key steps that we're taking to ensure the success of this initiative within that shortest period. While the third one were the critical success factor that actually that were put in place to achieve that success. And the fourth one, I think, which is a critical element, a part of it, is that in spite of these emergency measures, what is the long-term strategy to drive the access to energy within that health sector? So I'll start with the co-benefit element of it. So the most important element within that context is the energy access. But again, if you unpack that energy access and ask yourself questions, which we did in the government of Nigeria, why energy access? What will be the key element, the key co-benefit from that energy access? Now, we all know that one of the issues or one of the challenges or one of the symptoms of COVID is the respiratory element. And we know again that most of this healthcare centers, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, they go along with what we call the generators, the diesel-based generators, and that actually emit pollution. And this is very critical. This is this will be a very big challenge if we tend to get cases where respiratory becomes a very key issue down there. And with the pollutant, that's going to be a very big problem. That's one of the concerns. Another concern was the energy security that we're having in Nigeria, in terms of Nigeria is the oil producing country, and there's this large dependent on oil and its derivative, which is the diesel fuel. So that increases the price to the hospitals, and that reduces the resilience of those hospitals to be able to take care of their work. So those were key things or key elements that we thought about, and we knew that having a sustainable energy through mini-grid will be very, very critical. So that's the role that the mini-grid was going to play to support in that area. Now, the second element, the second element is the point where we talked about what were the key steps. Now, we started off with what was the government of Nigeria when they issued a palliative from a non-infrastructure perspective and an infrastructure perspective. So REA, the Rural Electrification Agency, came in from an infrastructure perspective where we're given a mandate by our ministry, because we are under the Ministry of Power, to start thinking about how will REA support. So the quick win was the isolation centers and the NCDC sectors. So we also looked at it from the 3 key states that the president announced that we're going to have lockdown. There were Abuja, Lagos, and Ogun State. Now, these 3 key states were very indicated by the president, and that is where we mirrored our palliative support, infrastructure palliative support through the mini-grid to support these 3 states. So we had a total combined of 108.1 kilowatts altogether, broken down into 53.1 kilowatts, and the lowest was 10 kilowatts. Now, when you talk about, so the key stakeholders that were really involved to drive this process was the government, and the government was divided into one, the Federal Ministry of Power, which is the sponsor, the implementing agency, which was Rural Electrification Agency, what do you call it, the co-sponsors, the Ministry of Health, and also the co-implementing agency, that's the NCDC, and also the hospitals, the medical, the government-based hospitals that were also critical into that. But we had other stakeholders, the developers and the financial institutions. Now, all of them have their roles and responsibilities, and it took 14 days to actually get those roles and responsibility come together. So the first 6 days saw the paperwork being completed, the emergency procurement being the emergency procurement process being initiated by the government, and then we tailored it down to developers that had the speed, that had the capacity, that had the financial muscle also, which was very critical at that period of time, and had a very good relationship with the financial sector. So all that came together, and then we selected 2 developers to go into the state to deploy the mini-grid. So it took 8 days for that deployment to take place. So we started off from the 8th, and by 14th, the mini-grids were already set and done. On the 15th of April, we commissioned the first 2 in Abuja, and on the 16th, we now commissioned the one in Ogun State and the one in Lagos. So that's number 2. The number 3 was the critical success factor. So now the critical success factor for us at that point in time was one, because we had the presidential pass. Now the infrastructures that were supposed to move from their warehouse to their location, we have the security, the presidential pass that supported us to move those infrastructure to the base where they were supposed to be deployed. So there was no interruption of movement between states. Number 1. Number 2, we also had the mini-grid developers that we had stocks, because ordinarily when we want to do infrastructural mini-grid projects, it's always we importing them and the time for importation and etc. And remember, we had travel lockdown. We also had seaports being locked down. But the good thing was that the developers we selected they all have stock, minimum stock level, so it was easy to get those appliances and just straight away to go deploy. We also have the financial muscles, because then payment of resources, staffs, and etc. The developers also had that resources to deal with that. I think, and a very important thing that that was critical to this was what we call the top-down approach, whereby the Rural Electrification Managing Director and CEO had to discuss with the Managing Director of each of those companies. So it was more of like the C-suite level of discussion. So they knew how important this was. So it wasn't about the other operational guys talking to the Managing Director. No, it was more of the C-suite talking to each other. This is what we wanted to do. Overact by the presidential pass and the presidential palliative. So that was very critical, having that in place, which enabled that successful deployment in the 4 health center locations in Nigeria. Now, then lastly, and that is the emergency response measure, how strategic it is for long term. Yeah, so we've already started working with the African Mini-Grid Community of Practice, and I think the financial working group that's been led by Alexia. We've started working on that, and that was last year, when we're putting measures on how to technically and financially support the public health sector in Nigeria, which is over 30,000, including large federal medical centers that were also lacking energy. A detailed research was done last year by our Ridgebull Foundation, which was sent to the Rural Education Agency. And as I speak, tomorrow we'll be having the first ever technical and financial working group with huge, large financial institutions, the World Bank, IFC, the French Development Bank, African Development Bank, and REA, to see how we can energize the health system in Nigeria. post-COVID. So that engagement is going to start tomorrow, and that should help us drive the roadmap and the pathway to a long-term health sector, energizing the health sector, including the co-benefit that will bring into Nigeria. So I think I'm done here, and I want to thank you all for listening to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. This was great, and I think we're all fully supportive and with you in these efforts to fight COVID-19 and this pandemic. And it's great to see what jobs mini-grids can do there. You know, Ieva has mostly talked about how mini-grids should be included in our long-term sectoral planning, how they should be mainstreamed with broader sectoral goals, but of course also climate goals and other development goals. And here you have been able now to show quite impressively for how they can also be applied in the short term and very quickly, and hopefully, you know, and we're all with you with the results that you're hoping to see. We have 5 minutes left on the clock for Q&A. As per usual, that's not enough time. Maybe go a few minutes over, but be assured that some questions have been already answered live as we've been speaking. I've answered some, and Josh has jumped in as well. Those who we can't deal with live now, we will make sure that we turn back to you and answer questions to the best we can. I'm going to be mostly quiet. There was one question, beyond moderating at least, there was one or two questions directed at me, I believe, and I start with those, and I asked the panelists to please look up the Q&A window and get prepared for some of the questions that have been directed at you. And that was, why should solar mini-grids been built at all? Why should they be used? Why is the focus shifting to them? And I would say 3 reasons: affordability, sustainability, and reliability. And that's really what we're looking into in any energy source. Of course, PV modules and solar panels have become quite cheap. Over a certain number of years, they halved in cost every other year or so. And they are also a very reliable source of energy now. So now the question is then, what is the other side in hybrid? Are we talking about batteries? Are we talking about diesel generators? And I think a broad answer is impossible here, but I think it's also clear that increasingly, as battery technology becomes cheaper and affordable and also reliable, the move is from diesel generators as a second source in a particular mini-grid towards battery-based systems. Now, the question was then, how expensive really are they? That is extremely difficult because we are talking about extremely localized markets, and there is just a diverse range of cost factors that all play out differently depending on the technology, depending on location and the environment in which mini-grids are applied. And I mean, I'm seeing ranges from 5 cents per kilowatt hour, as cheap as 5 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour, just recently reported for Eastern Africa, to you know, about 21, 22, I'm not sure if Victor agrees, 22 cents per kilowatt hour in Nigeria, to you know, a global average cost of 55 cents. So you see how broad this range is, almost tenfold from between one location to the global average. So it's highly localized. All right, so let's go through a list of questions then. Maybe we can start with, let's see here, Rift Valley Power. You're getting a lot of compliments for your work there, Franz. So that's great to see. Maybe I can ask you 2 questions. One is that our audience has asked. One is, who do you see stepping up in the productive use field, productive use of energy field, particularly as it comes to financing instruments? You've been dealing with PPPs a lot. Who are your main financiers of your jobs? Who do you direct your grant or credit requests to? And secondly, how do you think COVID-19 is affecting your business? I know that you're supposed to be not in Vienna where you're calling in from, but in Tanzania. So there's already a first consequence of it, of course. But how do you see that in the longer term? Franz?
Yeah, first of all, the COVID-19 is not affecting us at the moment. Obviously, traveling is difficult for us. There is no shutdown as such in Tanzania. It's also very difficult to shut a country down, a developing country down, because people need to leave their houses and need to go to work and yeah, be active. So we can't see it yet. Predictions are very, very different. You hear a tsunami coming over Africa. It's a little bit glass ball reading at the moment. We are not affected as such. The only thing what we discover is that government meetings are not taking place as they should, because people actually can't meet. The video conference is not popular and is not done yet properly, as far as I'm aware. So decision-making processes, for example, for feed-in tariffs, to negotiate tariffs, to close contracts, that's difficult. So for the current business, we don't see any changes at the moment, but for project development, it's difficult. With regards to productive use, I mentioned before that that I think our facility that we offer, that was basically a trial facility. We've been setting up with Cross Boundary and the Rockefeller Foundation. They support various mini-grids in the region and in exchange for data. So they offer small baskets of funding where you can run this revolving fund and need to provide data to them, which is absolutely fair. We've seen that our money was pretty quickly used, mainly for electric motors, for maize milling and for saw milling. So 50% of our appliances, as I explained in my presentation, is maize or saw milling motors. What's interesting also is that there is financing available. People in our network area, they're relatively wealthy compared to the rest of Tanzania, and there is access to financing. We have these SACCOs. These are community financing institutions in the area who finance this kind of equipment. Apparently, we haven't researched that in detail, but there is financing available, and what we should concentrate on, apart from financing productive use appliances, is also educating people to repair them. We often see that appliances are used. When they break, there's no kind of service industry behind it to repair. So this is one of the reasons why we want to educate also electricians and young people who can actually repair these appliances.
Thank you. This is great. I'm going to remain with you for one more question, and please, make this also your final comment, if you might, if you feel there's anything you still want to raise that hasn't received enough attention, and that is sticking with finance for a moment. And it's probably asking you a company secret here. How have you financed your projects? What is what's the structure of the financing, the grant equity debt ratio?
I don't want to go into details, but the early days of the ACP Energy Facility were very, very helpful. And what I can say, we wouldn't have entered the rural electrification space if we wouldn't have got help from the European Union. I think the tariffs at the moment, I mean, we are not providing a lot of electricity to the real networks yet, but they are growing. They are growing and they absorb more and more electricity. So they are eating into the profits of our generation business, definitely. Although the grants help to set the business up, it's not a long-term solution to keep electricity tariffs low for a long time. We are working with Aurora to make them cost reflective, and every cent we earn goes into project development anyway. Yeah, we hope that this policy of subsidized rural tariffs will change over time, yeah, we're working on that with the regulator.
Fabulous. Thank you very much.
Without grant financing, definitely we wouldn't exist.
Yeah, that's understood. I think that's the same for most companies. So, question for you, Victor. You were talking already about it, I think, briefly. You know, what you're planning to do with the mini grids once, hopefully, you have successfully fought COVID-19. But what's your longer term plan there? What are you planning to do with those mini grids? Will they remain in place? How do you turn them into, you know, business models, or how do you include them in sort of the providing local services?
Okay, so because what we've done is because we started off looking at it from an emergency response, but before then, we've already started having what we call the strategic plan to energize the public health center and also the health center and also the health medical centers, mainstreaming them into long-term the mission strategy development focus and sustainable development goal also. So what we intend to do, and because some of these infrastructures are actually nearer to the peri-urban and most of the time at the rural area, so there's this strategy plan of having what we call that integrated planning approach, whereby the existing infrastructure that we have and the capacity are extended towards the rural area or the peri-urban. But as I speak, and I said earlier in my presentation, tomorrow a larger technical and financial working group being driven by REA will be sitting down together to unpack all these elements and channel and chart a roadmap that actually mainstreams access to energy, the climate change and sustainable development pathway for the health center. So that is what we're going to start tomorrow. Yes, and so with that we'll be able to give broader direction on how we are going to ensure long-term prospect of what we started off.
Wonderful. Thank you, Victor. And let me use this opportunity to thank you again for jumping in on relatively short notice. We wanted to have something that is up to date and build the link between mini grids and the actual crisis we're facing. So it has been really wonderful to have you. Maybe final question to you, Ieva. And this question concerns sort of the role of the private vis-a-vis the public sector. One of our participants asked why most of the support for mini grids is coming from the private sector. My understanding is there's quite an important role for the public to play, for funders to play, for international organizations, and usually being played to make the mini grids commercially viable. But what's your take on it? What's you know, to and use it maybe to wrap it up what we've learned today and drive home again sort of your key story here about how important public instruments really are to support the private sector.
Hi, thanks for the question. I saw quite a few questions that I think I might try to answer either in writing afterwards or now in the chat box. I think here it's not entirely clear to me whether the question was about private sector leading, you know, overall mini grid development or being mostly engaged in productive use. I guess maybe the latter, because that's what I mentioned in my presentation. I think the feeling, so I based part of my presentation, in particular in productive use, on a survey of about 23 or 24 developers operating across sub-Saharan Africa, private developers, asking them what their engagement is in that area. And the overwhelming response was that they don't see, they see gaps there, and that's why they're stepping in. In many cases, or at least I would say still in the majority of cases of those at least who answered, the survey that I ran, was that they're doing that sort of because they see a gap and because it's such an important part for the viability and sustainability of the mini grid. So they're really sort of trying to do what they can, and they're stepping out of the the traditional perhaps role that they would see for themselves. For others, of course, there are now very innovative developers that are coming in that are partly driven by applying these more innovative business models where the productive use becomes part of their business model. So I think there are different different aspects that drive their engagement, but still I would say for the large part it's a matter of a gap being sort of there because of, let's say, lack of engagement from donors from the public sector.
Super. Thanks, Ieva. We are 10 minutes over time, so it's time to close the session in a moment. Before you all run, please stay on for another couple of minutes. I want to thank the organizers. Here you see all the partners involved in the Africa Mini Grids Community of Practice Initiative. I want to thank GIZ, I want to thank NREL also for supporting this session. And I believe we have a survey just of a couple of slides, but with that I'm going to give it back to you, Josh. Maybe you can close the session and tell us about the survey. Thank you so much to all the panelists, and thank you for everybody calling in. We had 100 callers, so a high number, so it shows the interest in this topic, and we're not going to be quiet, but going to continue this initiative. Thank you so much, and over to you, my partner in crime.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thanks to Franz, to Victor, and to Ieva, and to you, Alex, as well, for a fantastic session. Time is always short. We had 1.5 hours. We are running over time, so I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank every single one of you who joined. We wanted to catch you before you sign off, just to wind this up, and to, of course, thank all of our partners as well. As we close down this webinar, we are going to keep it running while you leave. So as you click the leave meeting button, you should be directed to a short survey that we would really appreciate you filling out for us. The other thing is there was still quite a number of questions that probably still require further elaboration, aside from the answers that were given. We assure you that the slides and everything will be shared. And in addition to that, as part of our webinar comms, we will send through the Q&A with the answers which our panelists will have already applied their minds to and probably given more substantive answers where they're needed. So please rest assured that those questions will not remain unanswered. I know some of you, especially like Mark, who sent in his questions in advance. We'll make sure that those questions are answered to the best of our ability, and you will receive those in our webinar postcards. On that note, I would like to thank you all and sign off at this point. I know in a lot of your countries tomorrow is a Workers' Day, public holiday. We wish you a safe and restful weekend, and we look forward to you joining us in our next webinar and the last of our the next webinar that we will announce in the coming few weeks. We hope that we will receive the same level of engagement coming up. Thank you very much, and from all of us at the Africa Let's Partnership and South-South North, we would like to say goodbye.